Hi everybody, I'm Bree the Plant Lady, checking in with a top 5 plants for the month of July. I can't believe we are already at the end of the month. Summer is going way too fast, but I'm really excited to share a few outstanding plants that are looking awesome in my home garden here in Central North Carolina, Zone 7. Well, I absolutely have to start with the buckwheat because honestly, this buckwheat is like blowing my mind and all my expectations. This got sown on June 16th. So it's just, 6 weeks since being direct seeded in the ground. And you can see, now this is a bed filled with soil cube organic compost. So it's a really rich soil base, and we have gotten a ton of rain in the last 7 days, I think almost 8 inches. And the buckwheat has just gotten way taller than I've ever had it. It's actually almost my height. Let me turn this around. Okay, so here we are, no camera tricks. That's just a few inches shorter than me. So it's like 5 foot tall, you guys. It's just so awesome. The first time I grew buckwheat was because Dr. Denny Warner from NC State suggested it to me as a great fill in the gaps pollinator plant. And from that moment forward, well, I've been growing it continuously ever since then. And just one of those plants that I can't say enough positive things about. It's really, really easy. It definitely does better in more sun than shade. This is obviously a full sun border, but let me show you what it looks like growing in an area where it really only gets about 3 to 4 hours of direct light. So it's definitely past its prime over here. But you see, it's much shorter. In fact, like the carrots are starting to be taller than the buckwheat. I mean, it still grew and it flowered. And this was sown in March. This was sown like March 30th. So it's a much older round of crops. Here's what the seeds look like. And you can eat these. This is what like buckwheat flour, if you just grind this, and that's what buckwheat flour comes from. Or you can just, allow it to self-sow, and it'll sort of continuously grow and germinate. It's frost sensitive. It doesn't grow during the coldest parts of the winter, but it does grow, I have planted this in March, and it's grown all of April, all the way through now. And obviously you can see that bed right there. It's growing super strong. So another reason to grow buckwheat, not only because it has this great flower and it's visited by all kinds of different pollinators, but is because of its cover crop capacity. This is a chop and drop cover crop, so it doesn't fix nitrogen. It's not a legume. It doesn't nutrient scavenge because it doesn't have really deep roots. In fact, I'll pull one up so you can see, just how easily it pulls out, but you see not a really big root system. However, the role that buckwheat plays is when you actually cut it down and you allow all that biomass to decompose in place. And that ultimately adds organic matter and nutrients for the next round of crops to grow. Overall, I'm super pleased with how this bed has turned out. The fact that it's only been planted for like 6 weeks is really remarkable. And of course, that sun-credible sunflower is top notch. I featured that in last month's top 5 list. I think this is a really dynamic combination with the sunflowers and the buckwheat together. And next month, when the castor beans sort of pop out and then all the tall sunflowers and sesame really erupt out of the center and start flowering, well, this cottage border is going to be unlike anything else in my neighborhood, but really unlike anything that most people have ever seen. And that's what I love about growing all these unusual plants in kind of an out-of-the-box way. Buckwheat sometimes only gets allocated as a cover crop. There's no reason that as a home gardener, you can't also include it in your borders because it's so beautiful, and long-term, you'll get all the benefits from it. My next top pick for July has to be rice. specifically the containerized rice. These are two different varieties, Rex, which is green, and black mud rice over there, both growing in pots with no drainage holes. They were direct seeded in, I don't know, late May, early June, and look at how great they look. Let me give you a close-up. So first of all, the Rex rice. This one on the left, I actually did as a demonstration at an event the last weekend of April. And like most plants, the date from seeding to flowering is what that number is. And in this case, because it was done in late April, it's already starting to set flowers. Now remember, rice is wind pollinated. It's in the Poaceae family, just like any grass. And you see these little white things are actually part of the flower. Those are the stamens. And it just needs a tiny breeze for the pollen to move around. And that's actually part of the reason, or the main reason, that grains like grass edibles feed the world, because they're really efficient in their ability to set a heavy amount of seed. Now these are small pots. These are from Crescent Gardens. You can see I keep water in the pot. Thing is, it dries out pretty much daily, so I have not really been battling mosquitoes much. When I first got these planted, I put in some BT little bits, which help prevent mosquito larvae from forming. But at this stage, when they're actively growing, they absorb that water. I do water them every day unless we have a heavy rain. So this Rex rice, or this pot of Rex rice, was done probably 2 weeks after this one. And I do have videos that you can look at to see the process for potting. And this one is just starting to initiate some seed development deep down. Ultimately, these will, the seed heads will elongate, and they're really ornamental. Yes, you can harvest them to eat. Dehulling the seed is a bit of a process. Generally, I just grow it for the purpose of saving the seed so that I can grow it again. Now here we have a pot of black mudras, and this is a beautiful ornamental form with this really beautiful purple foliage. Right now you're seeing guttation. So you see these tiny water droplets on the end and like throughout the plant. That's actually a phenomenon that happens because of the level of humidity that we are experiencing right now. So if you ever see strange water droplets, that's not dew, it's not raindrops, it's actually moisture coming out of the plant itself, and it's called guttation. Now this is in a bigger pot, and this is really the ideal size. I think this is probably about a 7-gallon, and it's filled with soil cube. It was direct seeded, and you see how much taller it is? That's a direct reflection of the root system. So those Rex rice are shorter because they're smaller pots. It really is that simple. With rice, deeper root systems are going to enable you to have taller, more robust plants. Now here on the back porch, you can see another pot of Rex rice. Again, it's shorter, smaller container, and then the black mudras in that same 7-gallon size. You know, those pots are just from like Lowe's. And again, they're just plastic pots with no holes drilled into them. So they retain a lot of moisture, and the plants really appreciate it. Well, my third top pick has to be basically any plant in the Apiaceae family. This is parsley. You can see it's going to seed. I like to collect seed for eating and also to grow more plants out. But the main reason I grow it is for food for the swallowtail caterpillars. And we've had a ton of swallowtail caterpillars, and as of today, we have a lot of swallowtail butterflies. I'm really, really happy that this is finally happening, and it's a huge relief. Great thing about Apiaceae plants, there's a lot of them. So you have fennel and dill, carrots, celery. Well, there's a whole bunch of things, and all of those plants will support swallowtail caterpillars. So I mentioned Fennel, and I wanted to give you an update. Hayden and I, over the weekend, moved some swallowtail caterpillars from the dill to this patch of Fennel, and the caterpillars are doing great. Look at how big this one is. We did that because basically the dill was finished and there was hardly anything else for them to eat. And I'm really just so happy to see that they have just transitioned to the Fennel. And now the Fennel finally has a purpose, because I'm not a huge fan of eating it. So I just grow it for the purpose of the caterpillars. Of course, if I find more swallowtails that need to be relocated, I will move them here. This is Celery, also in the Apiaceae family. And I'm allowing this to go to seed because I also like celery seed. These have been growing. I seeded these last August, and they have been planted in these 100-gallon root pouches filled with soil cube since probably October or early November of last year. So my fourth top plant of July has to be Crinum lily. These are just the most extraordinary hardy bulbs. Of course, we have one of the greatest resources in the world, Jenks Farmer, who lives down in Beach Island, South Carolina. And he has the most incredible Crinum farm. If you ever have the opportunity, you have to visit him. You should totally look into his books. He's a wonderful author, a fabulous speaker, just an amazing person in general, and happens to be a Crinum expert. All the Crinums that I have actually came from him. I have been really bad about not remembering their names, but that doesn't mean that I can't enjoy their beauty. The fact that this is blooming in the end of July in a considerable amount of shade is, I think, really remarkable. I always recommend Crinum to anybody living in zone 7 through 9. They're a really great plant that love heat and humidity and are really tolerant of our southeastern climate. Well, my top plant choice for the month of July has to be Hydrangea paniculata. Now, there are like over 100 varieties of Hydrangea paniculata in the market, so it can be really confusing about which one you have and which one is best. And honestly, I haven't met a variety I didn't like. Of course, right behind me here is kind of the original, the plant that really changed the market. This is Limelight. It was originally introduced through Proven Winners, and it's a big plant. Look at that. It's a great big shrub, totally a plant that, you know, takes up real estate, but in the most vivid way. Of course, one of the reasons that I love this variety so much is that those flowers hold up really well, and I can use them as dried cuts for holiday arrangements. Now, I have probably 10 or 12 different varieties. Let me show a couple of them to you so that you can see that there are different flower forms and different ultimate sizes. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and confess to you all, I lost the names of these varieties, and it's a funny hodgepodge, and they don't look as good as they should because this slope gets too dry. But here is a really interesting one that has nice kind of pink bracts. And what I like about this one, unlike Limelight, this actually benefits pollinators because it has sterile flowers, essentially these, but also fertile flowers on it. Now, I think this might be, I'm not sure, Moonstruck? I don't know. I have not done a good job of keeping track of these names. But you can see this flower is enormous. I only have one flower. It's like a single stalk coming out of the ground, but it's a really big bloom, and that's pretty impressive. All right, this is a new variety of Hydrangea paniculata from First Editions called Little Hottie, and it desperately needs to be planted. I've been waiting to put this in the garden next door, but the great thing about this is that it's significantly shorter. So in contrast to that huge Limelight there, this can actually go towards the front of the border because it maxes out between 3 and 4 foot tall and wide. Now here we have kind of a tall, sprawly somewhat unruly plant that isn't really in the market anymore. This is one called Green Spire. I was impressed by it and gathered cuttings about a decade ago from the Ralston Arboretum. But again, what I really appreciate about it is that it has so many fertile flowers that benefit pollinators. So it's definitely a consideration when you are selecting a variety to try to make sure that not only is it a plant that is beautiful, but it actually serves the ecosystem in a beneficial way. Now, I really feel ridiculous showing you plants that I don't know the names of, but it's fair to say this is a great plant. I didn't plant it in the right place, that's for sure. And it's too big for me to transplant. But it's been reliable, and this is about its height. And this has been in the ground at least 5 years. And I actually was expecting it to be much taller. I kind of put it here with the intention of it being, you know, to kind of screen off this porch. But it hasn't grown any taller than this, and that's what it's supposed to do. It's been bred to be shorter. So there are a lot of varieties now that will offer you a lot of different heights. And that's a really important consideration to determine where it goes in your garden. And finally, I have Hydrangea paniculata Sweet Summer. And this is one that I planted like 11 years ago. This was part of the original install. And it's done really, really well. The one thing I don't like about it is that the flowers do kind of get brown at this time of year, and they don't dry as well as Limelight. They are big and beautiful. They also are pretty weak wooded. So you see how this is all just sort of flopping over. We did just have rain. But this is partially my fault. Last year, I decided to try and make them standard, so I cut them to single stem. And this variety in particular, I think, needs the structural integrity of multiple branches. So you see, I did it to both. I have this sort of anchoring this foundation bed. And at this stage, the plant kind of looks ridiculous because the flowers are just too heavy and they flop over. So that's a cultural consideration, and certainly something for you to recognize that maybe they aren't really meant to be on standards, or at least this variety really wasn't meant to be on a standard. Well, I hope that my top 5 plants for July will inspire you, and maybe you'll be able to add these to your must-grow lists. And I do hope that you will like and subscribe to the Breathe the Plant Lady YouTube channel for more practical gardening advice right here from my Zone 7 garden in Central North Carolina. Thanks so much for watching, everybody, and happy gardening.